Hello, my name is Jespersen, Solution Architect at Transmute. Today I will go through the issuing process of issuing verifiable credentials by using Excel. So I've logged into the Verifiable Data Platform. And the first thing we want to do is find the template that we want to work with under templates. We will take the purchase order and download over here, download the Excel file there. Once downloaded, we will see the file available here, and let's open that up. All right, so this is the introduction page on the template. You can read the instructions, but really that's what we're going through now. So for now, let's just skip it. I'll just open up a little bit here to get a little more space, and we can zoom in as well. Okay, so this is the template we have to work with. Just quickly going through the columns. This column A is a list of identifiers which the VDP uses to pick out the data. So basically, it's just there, and we shouldn't touch it. It's for machine readability. Column B is for is the name of each property. So that's definitely for human usage, and we'll use that extensively. Column C is for additional description of each element. So also something we can use as we go through this. Column D is an example, which might be inspirational, but it's otherwise not used at all. It's not used during issuance or anything else. So what you can do is you can copy that column and copy it over to the VC1 column, which will get issued, and you can quickly issue this sample. We're not going to do that, so what I'll do now, I'll just delete it because it will be in the way as we go through this. And then we have here the new column D, which is headed as VC1. So that's our first credentials that we're going to issue. A little bit later, we'll go into making additional columns. We'll call them VC2, 3, 4, so on. But for now, let's just stick with one. All right, so I will make these purchase orders very simple. So they're probably not gonna reflect real purchase orders. They're gonna be a little on the simplistic side, even for small purchase orders. Nonetheless, let's just go through this. I'm gonna call myself Guide Inc. As our organization, the name of our issuing organization. And let's go with 1000 Ocean Drive. That'll be enough for. No, that didn't look so good. Let's just, not that it matters, but I like to keep my colors clean here. I'll just skip the rest of the address. None of that is needed. Let's give it a purchase order number. Something like this should be fine. The order date, here's something to be aware of when we enter a date like this. It has to be in a specific type, data type, and that can be a little bit tricky. If I go with, let's say tomorrow, you'll see what Excel does here. It converts it into a date, which that's great. Excel means well, but it doesn't help us a lot, because when that comes over and the underlying data gets interpreted, it will not work out. So what you want to do is make sure that it's text, and then it converts the date back, and it's kind of annoying. But this here is how you want it to be. You want it to be a string value that represents a date, because that's what the technology behind expects. So be aware of that. Now let's say we have a buyer. Well, we are both the issuer and the buyer, so let's just copy this. That's a little redundant. You could skip it also. And we have now the seller. So let's make this our guide supplier Inc. So this is our supplier in this case. We'll just skip the address. We don't need any of that. Again, for legal reasons, you would probably not want to skip the address, but I want to just get down to the trade line items here. And you can see here, we have a trade line item. So you know purchase orders, you know that you can have multiple line items on such documents. So we'll just go with, we'll buy some pencils. And this is classic pencils. That's fine. We can give it a product ID. Well, actually, no. If this is an ID, because this is an ID, we need to give this an actual identifier term. So, for example, we can call it something like HTTPS supplier and pencils and something like this. Has to be a real what's called a unique resource identifier. So it has to be something like this, or start with URN, or something to that effect. You can give it SKUs, GTINs, you can give the product name. So we already we named the line item, so I think that's enough. We don't need to also identify and name the product. Let's just go with this. I do want to put in a price though. Let's see, where's the price? Here's the product price. So let's say these cost USD, and we'll ship, say, I will buy, say, 10,000 pencils. So that will give a total of this line item of 10,000 US. Okay, now this is important to understand. The green here represents what's called an array, and that's because, like I said, you can have multiple line items. So you might have additional, as you add additional items to be purchased here, in this case, you will repeat this whole block, and that's what you see repeated down here. The way you can see it is on this number here, the 1. Those arrays always start as a 0. So this is the 0, that's the first line item. This is the 1, that's the second line item. And if you needed more than 2 line items, you would need to copy these rows and make an additional one. We can try it just like this. And then you would have to also make sure that the counter is incremented. Replace, we'll just go with replace 1, 2, and replace all. Like this. This would give you a third line item, so 0, 1, and 2, and you could enter additional data in here. We'll just stick with the 2 line items. That's just enough for the demo. But be aware of that. Working with arrays is a little bit tricky. There's one more trick to it, but I'll get back to that as we add a second credential. All right, the other line item we'll do is erasers. Let's just call them white rubber. And let's say they are also, we don't need quite as many of them. So let's say 1,000. And they are 2 US. So the total of that line item would be 2,000 USD. Now we have 2 line items and 10,000 and 2,000. That means that the total order amount would be 12,000 USD for the entire purchase order. This should be it. Let's try and go ahead and issue this. By the way, I know there will be this will be problematic, but I want to show you an error code as well, so you get used to that and how interpreting that. Here's the download that we were just filling in. I drag it into this drop area. I select the decentralized identifier that I want to use as the issuer. And as expected, we do see an error code, which I wanted to make sure got captured on the video. Missing property ID. Let's head back and see what that means. That is way up on top here. You can see this little asterisk here. That means this is a mandatory field. So that means we must fill in this value. We can't just fill it in with anything. Like before, it has to be a unique resource identifier, an URI. So it needs to start with HTTPS or DID or URN, something like that. Please find elsewhere on our guide about identifiers. I'm gonna just give it something. No, actually, this was our supplier. So let's just say let's say this is our guide URL, and we'll just say orders and give it something like this. That will suffice. Because the reason this works is that it's a URI because it's HTTPS, and I can ensure, assuming this is under my domain, I can ensure that this is a unique identifier. So this works out. I'm gonna save this now, and that should now get through the issuance. Yes, we got past the check, and here we have a single credential. So what we're doing is here we're issuing a batch of one credential, and agree on the data, and this should now be interpreted and issued. Let's just take a look. It is a valid credential, and we can see, well, we can see the content here. This is what we entered: pencils, 10,000 pieces, and the total price of 12,000. And yeah, that's great. But we want to also cover one of the main arguments for using this batch feature and Excel is that you can do many credentials, issue many in one go. So let's just switch back here. I already alluded to this earlier. What you can do is you can copy this and make a second credential. Now I want to just make sure that Excel is very kind again. So you could also do this, which is great. It looks almost the same, and indeed it increments the VC to VC2, which is what we want, but it tends to also increment these technical values up here. We really don't want them to change. So I recommend that you don't do what I just did there, but rather copy and then paste into the second. And then we'll just manually update VC2. And you can, obviously you can copy more if you want it. You can name this 3, but again, for the sake of the demo, I think 2 should be enough. So let's just get rid of this again. Okay, let's say the second, imagine we haven't issued our first one. So actually, you know what? Let's just go back here and delete this, just so we don't get confused about that. Here, and delete this. That should be gone in a second. Now let's imagine we want to issue these two purchase orders at the same time. Obviously we don't, oops. Yeah, that was not intended here. We don't want it to have the same ID as we just talked about. That's an anti-pattern, so we want to just increment the counter. The issue name is the same. Our address is the same. The buyer is the same, that's also us. But let's say this is our guide, the guide's second supplier. So it's a different organization we're purchasing from. So that has changed. And instead of pencils, let's make it pens. Black fancy pens. And here we will make the ID of these black fancy pens. We will make it second supplier, and then pens. Here, that works. These are more expensive, so let's say they are $5 each, and we just want 1,000 of them. So that's a total of the line item of 5,000. If we only wanted this, nothing more, it's tempting to then delete this second entry of the array that we talked about before, but that is not possible. When you issue a batch of credentials, you have to have the same number of entries in each array. That means if you want to do this, which is, you could have perfectly valid reasons to do this, but you would have to do that in two individual issuance steps with 2 Excel files. If what we're doing here, you have to have the same amount of line items for each of the credentials that you enter. So let's assume that is the case. So we will order some ink cartridges as well. And these are what, $3, and we need 100 of those, or 1,000 of those. So that's 3,000. And then the total price is 8. Okay, there. Let's try this. I'm gonna save. And let's do a new, I deleted the old one, so we have a completely blank slate here. And let's try and issue this. I select the issuer for all of the credentials. This is a choice that applies to them all. And here now we can see that there are 2. We are guiding and we're issuing 2 credentials. That's exactly as we expect. And we go ahead and issue. This takes a little longer because we have 2 instead of 1 to issue, so it takes, yeah, twice the time. This can actually take a little while if you have like a full long list of credentials. We cap it to 10, and if the credentials are also long in terms of data, it can take a while, but just be patient. Great. We have 2 credentials now issued. We can verify them, and these are hard to tell apart from in here on the list view because they come from the same issuer, which is us. So let's just dive into one of them. This was our classic pencils. So if you wanted to kick that off and actually make the order, you might present and include this credential to one supplier and present the other credential to your second supplier. And you could do that like this. So our supplier, and you could send that off and start off the process. That concludes this quick little tutorial on how to work with Excel, how to work with arrays in particular, how to work with multiple credentials to be issued in the same batch. It's a really strong feature of the Verifiable Data Platform, and I hope you find it useful. Thank you for your time.